Welcome back to Crushing Canaan. I am Seth Varnadore, joined by Pastor Nathan Varnadore for another episode of our beautiful podcast here, episode 19. So,
big, beautiful podcast.
one closer to 20, which is double the amount we thought we would be able to do. So, we're getting there. Last week we kind of introed the 10 Commandments. Today we're going to be talking about the first 2 commandments. Get a little bit more in depth on those. But first, our quickly answered question of the week, and maybe this is another one that's not super quickly answered, but I was thinking about this recently. You hear, especially, you hear a lot of Catholics talk about Catholic guilt, Catholic shame, things like that. How can you, I guess, discipline's not the right term, but get especially children to recognize this sin, because it seems like a lot of these people have taken this from when they were younger and they were taught about sin to it being all feeling a lot of guilt and feeling a lot of shame. How can you teach children about sin and being accountable and things of that nature without kind of making them feel shame? Or should you feel some shame and some guilt?
So the thing you got to recognize with sin is what sin is and why you need to be saved from it. That it is what separates us from God. And you do have to have this moment of clarity where you go, there is nothing I can do. There's no work I can do that will earn my right to make it to heaven. And one of the biggest misconceptions we see a lot of evangelical churches doing is, and there's mainline Protestants as well, is that we somehow are capable of saving ourselves. We just need to do a lot of good things, be nice to people, do good works. And that's not how that works. It's the very reason why God sent the 10 Commandments is, hey, here is my standard. And Jesus expounds on it, and we find out we fall short of it. So I heard a pastor say one time, sin, the middle letter in sin is the letter I. It's anything that puts you at the center of your life, your salvation. So when it comes to doing that with kids, a lot of times kids, when you talk to them, you go, what is sin? And they go, well, it's when you do bad things and you break the rules. You have to really break it down to them without, I think some people take it over the top, but you do want them to have an understanding that, no, it's more than just you didn't listen to mom and dad. It is that you and I are incapable of earning our way to God, but he sent us a way named Jesus Christ, to pay that price for us so that we can do that. So there is an element of self-awareness that you want to echo. And I hate it when churches pull it. Do you love Jesus? Well, what do you think a little kid's going to say? Yeah, little kids don't, they may hate a sports team because they hear mom and dad say, you hate that team, or, what was it? Our cousin had a shirt with Jesus, 2 thumbs down. Jesus hates the Yankees.
I don't know.
Yeah. Won't say which cousin, but listen to this. But yeah, there is an element of them needing to understand, hey, there's not one, and we read this in Romans, there's not one found righteous before God. We are not born good. That God's standard of good and evil is vastly different than ours. And so if you can teach them that, and teach them that, hey, Christ took on that shame for us, which is what makes his grace amazing, then you kind of goes back to what we talked about. To understand the power of the gospel, you also need to understand the law. And they need each other. The gospel saves, the law doesn't. The law condemns. Well, kids need to understand, hey, when you ties into what we're going to talk about today, these are why God sent the 10 Commandments. And here's what those things mean. Here's what, and do we really follow it like that? And they're like, they'll realize, oh, no, we don't. But you know what? Because we fall short, Jesus paid that price for us, and his works stand in front of us. So those are some things that I think people miss out on in conversations with their kids. is those kind of discussions, and understanding who God is, understanding his goodness and grace and mercy, but also understanding his justice and his wrath is just as important as understanding his mercy and his love.
So, I mean, you should, and is it your thought you should be teaching it like, hey, this is just kind of, this is how it is. You're not going to be unable to sin. So don't feel shame. Obviously try to be better, but this is unavoidable.
Right.
Right. And so, all right, so let's work, let's go into the Ten Commandments. We're going to talk to the first two. It's interesting. So we started reading the Bible over the summer as a family. We started at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing how, we talked last week about, hey, here's God sends, hey, 10 things, just 10 rules. You can keep 10 rules. That's easy, right? And you can't. But then going back even further, he started with one rule.
Mm-hmm.
Don't eat this. That's it. There's your one
That's
rule.
Yep.
Couldn't do one. All right, let's try 10. All right, you can't do that either. All right, I'm going to send somebody to help you out.
Right.
So I thought it just struck me kind of listening. It started with one rule in the Garden of Eden, and
well, when you look at
keep that one.
all the laws they're all expoundings on these 10 commandments.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with the 10 commandments that people don't realize is God, there's, out of the 10, 70% of them, 7 of them are how we are to be with each other. How do we honor God with each other? There's 3 that are directly dealing with God, right? Like that's pretty amazing when you think about it, is that God in his law has an expectation of not just how man is to be with him in relationship, but how they are to be in relationship with one another. That's a big thing. Sometimes we take it one direction and we just go, well, maybe. So just be nice to people. We try to blanket it all and, okay, do this, do that. And there's other times we get so pharisaical with it. I mean, that's literally what happened at the time of Jesus, is they expounded on so much stuff that they eventually got to a point where they said, oh, you picked up a mat on the Sabbath. That's work. You broke God's law. It's like, oh, Lord, now you're going so far the other way.
Even the Bible hates bureaucracy.
Red tape is satanic. Go.
So today we wanted to go, last week, if you didn't listen last week, which maybe you didn't, we talked we introed the 10 Commandments and why they were given and things of that nature. So check last week for kind of an intro to the 10 Commandments. This week we wanted to dig down into the first 2 a little bit. So we're going to talk commandment number 1 and commandment number 2 today. So commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods.
Yep.
Let's start there. I know you gave a nice.
I'm going to go ahead and knock out. I'm going to go ahead and read verses 1 through 6. They tie in together, even though the first 2 commands. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Do not have other gods besides me. Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in heavens above or in earth below or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow and worship them, and do not serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the father's iniquity to the 3rd and 4th generations, and to those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. So those are the first 2 commands. No other gods. Some translations say before me. That particular translation says besides me. And then we summarize the other one as no idols or graven images. And it's important to make that distinguishment, because what we see here is in that first command, God is saying, you will not have a God that will be upheld to me, a creator, somebody who has creative dominion or anything like that. It was one of the things that he wrestled and destroyed when he sent the 10 plagues. It is believed that upwards of 27 gods were judged in the 10 plagues, where God brought down his wrath and judgment on various gods, those who some people thought were part of a pantheon equal. If there is a God to the Hebrew people, then we have gods as well up there with them who can counteract and counterdo. And that's what God is saying. No, you will have no other God before me, besides me. And the literal translation, the Hebraic understanding actually means in my face, in my presence. You will not have another God in my face. And there is a certain amount of intimacy that occurs when you're looking at somebody in their face. And I actually preached on this a couple of weeks ago. The best example for me to give is I'm awkward about eye contact. I am very horribly awkward about it. The only people I really can make eye contact with is my wife and my children. Okay. And I can look them in the face and they know that when I lock in on them, it is business and it's intimate, right? It is very intimate. When God is speaking that you will have no other gods in my face, he is saying you and I are locked in. I am your focus. So if I am deeply intimate with my wife and we have eye contact and I am wanting to have a certain amount of attention and importance to her and she to me. And yet I keep looking around her. I keep looking around her to see if there's something better. Is my true focus to my wife? No, that means I'm trying to look for something better. What God is saying is you will have no other gods in my face and you are locked in. You and me are right here. I am all you need. You don't need anybody else to fill in what I can do. I am the creator of all. There are no other gods. So when he's talking about that in the first commandment, there is this depth of you don't even look anywhere else for identity and holiness. There is no other God. There is no other one. I am he. I am the one. I am the one who you look to, and you cannot find an equal. God does. There are people who want to be enemies to God, but here's the newsflash. He really doesn't have enemies. There's no equal. There's nobody who can stand up to him. There's a guy who did that in his pride, and guess what? The devil at best, and this is a whole different episode, but he's a dog on a leash. God's in full control even there. He does what God allows him to do. So God is making it abundantly clear, hey, you will not have another God. I'm not playing that game. There is no other creator. There is no other that can do what I do. Lock in on me. Look at me. Look in my face. I am all you need.
So it seems some have group no gods before me, and then the idols and graven images as one commandment.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what?
Well, you could. Okay, so you yes and no, and here's how you need to differentiate it. An idol is essentially something that you make.
Yeah.
Right. An idol is something that you would say, I can have this and God. I can believe in God, but I also need this. Another God is when you say, this who has ultimate authority and a co-equal in some way.
Especially in the context of the time, right?
Right, because what was also happening is many of the Israelites, because you got to remember, they were in Egypt for hundreds of years. This wasn't like, Joseph died and then his kids and grandkids all of a sudden this is hundreds of years. This is generations have passed.
And every other religion at the time was polytheistic with multiple
very
gods.
Much. And so there's a very, very good chance that many of those Israelites, while they believed in God and they put the blood over their door and all that, they probably brought various, they might have acknowledged other gods, and there was idols for some of those gods, or they would go to a temple to honor this other God. Yeah. So God is saying, okay, we're here. I have brought you out of slavery. I have brought you out of the land of Egypt. I have freed you. There's no one else. None of them can do that. None of them are ever going to do that. None of them are capable. They're not a thing. Idolatry, now we get to the next one. The second commandment is anything that you take worship away from God, acknowledgement, or you start to find your identity in. Yeah, the best example I can give, I was a football coach 15 years. And for so many years of my life, that became my identity. That became everything I was enthralled with. Everything fell underneath that. I have an idol. I had an idol. Every decision I made, that became in the forefront. My family, all that. It was a whole thing, right? What was important, and God did bring that for opportunity. I took the blessing and I started giving that my worship and my passion, my desires. And eventually that just became an idol. For many people, it could be money, if it could be their careers, it could be status. Uh, Something that they say, I acknowledge that there's one God, but here's this thing in my own authority that I'm going to put in there to put in my passions and my worship into. And so there's the different, there is similarities, but there is a difference in why God addressed that. He says right there, you're not to make any images or idols, or which, by the way, what happens after Moses does pen the 10 Commandments? What does he go down and sees? And there's two arguments, by the way, about that incident of the golden calf. In both, I believe, are correct. You had some who say, well, we need a God to worship while Moses is heading up there. We need to acknowledge one. We need to acknowledge somebody. And by the way, Scripture does make it clear. While we may not see this in some English Bible translations, they were having an orgy down there. They were partying and they were having an orgy down there. So he comes in and like all these commandments that God just gave are being broken right there in front of him. And so Moses is furious because he's like, I can't cover this. And you have some who make the argument that they just wanted to have an image of God, the God that freed them. So they wanted to have something centered to worship. And so again, either way, let's say both were like that. Like, oh, we need to create a God. Okay, well, you just idolatry, or you create, here's a God that you believe is co-creator to worship. But then you have someone go, well, no, I need an image of God. I need an image of God to worship him. That's hard because when you think about many churches today, I've had somebody recently say to me, I cannot worship God without blank. I won't say what it was, but it was something in our church that many churches have. And it's not a bad thing. But they said they cannot think of Jesus without that item there. And it's funny, one of our senior adults heard that person say that, looked right at him and said, well, then you don't have Christ, you have an idol. And that tore them apart. Because why were we made? Why did God make us? What's that like? Why did God make us? When you boil it down, why do we exist? Why did God make us?
You're asking
Want to take a crack at
it? To glorify him.
There you go. To worship him. We are worshipers. And worshipers, it's not just that's not music, right? We kind of throw that around. It's when God is the center of our passions and our desires, and everything we do is through the lens of honoring and glorifying him. And all we do to honor God with the best of our time, talent, and treasure. And so if we keep that in mind when we do that, we have faith that God is blessed us with things, and we are to bless others in his name. We are to honor and glorify him. Churches that are enthralled with money, for example, that they turn their church into a house of business. So Jesus would flip those tables in a heartbeat. Do people make money? Absolutely. Does money become an idol? Absolutely. But there's also people out there that God gave that money to go bless others with. He gave that to them because he also equipped them to do so. There's some who don't have that. There's some that he actually gives status to, prominence, platform. They can do one of two things. They use it for themselves, and now that's an idol in their life, or they use it to honor him. And now they are glorifying him, and people will change and come to know him through their obedience. So idolatry is not just, carve a statue while people did do that back then, it in our context today covers a lot of ground. There's a movement, a new age movement, by the way, going back to the first commandment, that says you can believe in God and be a Buddhist. You can be God, you can believe in God and be Hindu. You can believe in God, and it just spirals out of control. And God called that out first. There's a reason why these are the first two commandments that he gave, is because he knew that this is a problem that mankind will always have. You know how many times idolatry is addressed and called out in a negative way throughout the whole Bible, throughout all 66 books we have? Over 100 times. It's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big sin. It looks different. It looks different throughout the generations. It looks different. But when it's all said and done, it just recycles itself.
Mm-hmm. I do have a question on the graven images, because I've heard you kind of mention it in passing previously, when we were especially when we were talking about media. Are there some that think that any representation in media of Jesus or God?
There are some camps that say absolutely not. They won't sniff it. They won't touch it. We kind of pick on The Chosen a little bit because it's popular culture right now. There are people that I know that refuse to watch it because it is a depiction of Jesus. They wouldn't watch The Passion. They won't watch Jesus the Nazarene. They won't watch anything because they are very much like, oh, no, you don't do that. I don't adhere to that. I don't adhere to that. By the way, I don't adhere to it. I will say this, though. I don't agree with having the image of Jesus slapped around all over the place in a church, and Jesus looks like what we want him to look like. That's touchy. That's controversial. That's, we grew up in a Southern Baptist church where I had somebody call it Malibu Jesus, blonde hair, blue eyes. And it's like, that's not what he looked like, guys. I think that there's a reason why God says no to these things. And I really believe this. I look at the text because mankind has a very, very bad habit of taking an image and making that the identity. And then we start to form Jesus or God into what we want him to be.
Yeah. Do you think that starts out initially as, because it talks in Isaiah that this is not a beautiful man, right? This is not a beautiful
Isaiah 53, that there is nothing special about him.
Yeah. So, do you think, though, especially like thinking back to like Renaissance painters and things like that this was a form of worship for them to make God beautiful,
honor God?
So,
to honor God. I mean, it's touchy, right? You can't look at some of the imagery, like you look at art, especially at the time of the Renaissance and even medieval art, and you see various depictions of heaven, and you see and it's gorgeous. I mean, when we went to Israel a couple of years ago, and we were able to go into a lot of these Orthodox Catholic churches. Oh my gosh, it's magnificent, the art. But I also don't view it, though, as this is what how it went down, this outlook. I view it very much as that. It was art that honored God. It was a form of worship. A lot of people who did it with the intent of, I want to honor God. I don't want this to ever be.
Is the difference that it shouldn't be up in a church, probably, or is that or at the centerpiece of a church?
You're talking to a guy who has stained glass windows in his church, and in each of the stained glass windows is a little image of different scenes of the life of Jesus in it. And look,
I like that personally, but
I don't mind it.
I'm just trying to get the other side of it.
So I will tell you, and the people who in our church who listen to this are going to like clench their fist if they're more traditional. I would prefer to have an icon of the event that's being depicted rather than the picture of Jesus.
Yeah,
that's me. That's me personally.
I'm
not going to walk around and say blasphemy and go wild on that. No, I just think that when we get caught up, and again, it's eye-opening when you go to the location, you see the sights, and there are, okay, prime example. I got to go to Mount Carmel, where Elijah called down fire on the prophets of Baal. I got to go to that site, the legit site.
Yeah.
It was nothing like what I grew up depicting it as in my mind and in picture books.
Yeah.
Nothing like it. Nothing like it. It was underwhelming in size, overwhelming in power when you replay it the way it should. And I think there's a lot to be said about the discipline of forming your mind's eye. It's not dishonoring God, but I wonder what he looks like. I wonder what he looks like.
Yeah.
But I think many of us, when we drive that as our answers, we're missing the point of what we're supposed to do. Right? The mindset we need to have is that'll be answered one day.
Yeah.
I don't need to dwell on that today. I have a mission ahead of me. And so when you look at the downward spiral of what people have done, many practices that have made its way into the church has unintentionally become a form of idolatry. I actually just preached on this Sunday in my church, idolatry, and broke it down, gave that same definition. And at the end of the service, we do a time invitation so that people, if they need to clear their hearts before the Lord, and we had communion this week as well. So, I'm big into hey, don't come to the table in an unworthy manner. If you need to make something right with our Lord, reconcile something with your brother and sister in Christ, you need to do it now. Like we hammer that. But I asked the question, how many people today are willing to admit they are practicing idolatry? Now that you know what the biblical definition is, and it was an amazing / scary moment to see a good chunk of the people in our church raising their hand, acknowledging, repenting of their idolatry. It's a powerful thing when they understand what it means. When you understand why there's this separation between the first and the second commandment, why don't you just say, if you have any form of a God, you're breaking it? No. Why did God have to separate the two? Because he knows that somewhere in our minds, the way we're wired, our sin nature, we are going to justify things. I believe in God. There's a lot of Christians who go to church on Sunday who practice idolatry. A lot of them.
Could you restate that definition one more time, just in case somebody missed it earlier?
So idolatry is the practice of taking what God has given you to honor him with and using it for giving your worship away in some way, shape, or form. Something else. There are people that we know that are brilliant with finances. I'll pick on finances because people think, accuse churches all the time. All we care about is money. Right? Let's just put it out there. Whatever. But some of you have been blessed with knowledge of finances. How are you honoring God with that? That's it. How are you honoring God with that? I know people who God blesses abundantly and they just keep giving it away. They give it away and it keeps coming back to them. And you're like, oh my gosh, they are being obedient to God. They're like, I need to bless people. God has brought this to me and I bless people with it. There are some people who don't have any money financially, but what they do have, they're very gifted and they're creative. Are you doing that to honor God, or are you trying to pursue something else? For some people, it's platform, popularity. It's some people are for finances alone. Anything that you give your efforts and worship to that does not honor God, you are practicing idolatry. You are finding your faith in something. You're like, I believe in God, but I also need this in order to believe in God. Here's a harder one. I got confronted about this, but in a good way. In a good way. You being a parent or a spouse can be an idol. If you live your life saying, if I lose this, I can't love God, it's idolatry. All things fall under love God and the rest will fall into place.
Well,
It's why the 10 Commandments are structured the way they are. The first three, we'll get into the third commandment next week. It's the vertical. Okay, the vertical. See, I got the cross in the background here. So
wow.
look at that, right? That works. But there's vertical, how we relate to God, but then there's what? Horizontal, how we relate to each other.
Look at you.
Yeah, I know, right?
You're a showman.
Yeah. Right.
How can we,
Bob Ross, happy accidents.
so how can we make things, I guess the question is, right, because a lot of people have things that are important to them in life outside of, how can we still have those things have importance to us and keep God number one? Is there any advice or anything? Because for me, like, I'm a guy that I love sports. I love
I do too.
things like that. I love my family. There's a lot of things in life that I really enjoy. But how can we?
You have to.
How can you kind of still have those be important parts of your life without being overruling everything else? Like how can you kind of hold yourself from that?
Well, it's like addiction, right? It's like addiction. There are some people who can have a beer or a glass of wine and be fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then when does it become a problem? When they need it, right? That applies to any and everything else. You need God. That is your ultimate need. You need his grace. Okay. If you have something in your life that goes beyond that, if you say, I need, and I've heard a pastor say this, I need a big platform because what I do is that important. Friend, you don't have God, you have an idol. You need God. And remember, Jesus said what? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added onto you. I know parents, and by the way, children are your number one ministry. They're a blessing. So don't take what I'm about to say as saying they don't matter. I'm not saying that. But if they matter more to you than God, then how is God in the center of that relationship? How is God empowering that? If you cling on to your spouse and you're absolutely terrified of, if I lose them, then I can't, then I don't, then God's not real. Then you really don't know God.
My wife might be praying the opposite.
Yeah, right. Depending on the day of the week. Oh, it's a very hard thing, but if you can look in the mirror and if there's anything that you go, if I lose this or don't have this, then I don't have God. Then, friend, you really don't have God. You have an idol. And it could be very materialistic. It could be very, good Lord. We're all guilty of it. That's the thing. We're all guilty of it. There's always something, right? But there's two things we have to remember about what God does. Number one, God is not, he doesn't have competition. He destroyed, he judged, he mocked 27 Egyptian gods to reveal this is not a thing.
We're going to talk about that one day.
We will, because you're fired up about it. But the other thing in the second commandment that we need to remember, God will also destroy idols. He gives us the chance to present it to him to be destroyed. So either you present it to him and say, God, take this idol away. God, and he'll, hey, my spirit, I will kill that every day. Let's kill that every day. And watch what happens. All of a sudden, he may not take those things away. He may actually allow you to reprioritize them. I love football. Oh, I lose my mind still over it.
Mm-hmm.
But, and people laugh because they still see the traces of that in my personality and my dynamic. But I go, God used that as a tool to prepare me for this time. And I had my priorities messed up at one point. Right? But God, I say, God used that as a tool to prepare me for this calling now today. I love it, but it's no longer where I put my identity in. And so that's the difference. If that is your identity, think about how many people we know who have been very successful in business, and that's become their identity. They have become prominent figures, local
Well, it's a
politics,
lot of. I mean,
business owners.
I think that's becoming more and more and more prevalent. Is my identity is my political party, or my identity
Yep.
is my job, or my identity is my sports team, or things like that. Is I would think it seems to be becoming more and more and more prevalent in society.
I sat down when I first came in. I sat down with somebody who I don't agree with politically. I'll put it to you that way. But when we sat down and we talked about the issues biblically, that individual walked away and said, I don't view that guy as being part of this political party. I view him as a biblicist, somebody who cares more about what Scripture says. And they had reasons for how they vote too, that are, by the way, that are biblical. That's what's crazy. But that same individual a year later came to me and said, I don't think I can vote for them anymore. I can't. I don't think in this next election. Now, they don't agree with our president on how he conducts himself. And I don't agree with everything with him either, by the way. But that's not my identity. Who I vote for is not my identity. Our society tells you what, that is your identity. So if you vote this way, here are the boxes you better check. If you vote this way, no, that's not how that should work. Your identity shouldn't be found in what you have, right? Your identity shouldn't be found in your hobby. Can that be part of you? Yeah. God gave you that for joy and made it good. I'm actually reading a book. Let me grab it real quick. I encourage people to get it. It's called Strangely Bright. It's about, can you love God and enjoy this world? Yes, you can. Spoiler. Guy who
don't need to buy it anymore.
Yeah, no, read it because it breaks down very nicely. And the guy who wrote it did. I mean, it's interesting because he's a Presbyterian, unashamed Calvinist. But this book that he wrote has been kind of profound to a lot of all the different denominations. So even though he slants away, but he brings up a valid point. Like, hey, we are the ones internally that take these good things God has given us and we worship them. We take the blessings he's given us and we start, instead of worshiping the blesser, we worship the blessings.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this is probably the breaking of this commandment is probably the number one, or one of the number one ills in modern society, I think, because it's, to me, in my opinion, that life lived for your own pleasure, which seems to be a lot of people, just in whatever way it is. It seems to be their identity is how they get pleasure.
Well,
it leads to a society.
I'll take a step further.
That doesn't function very well.
God does provide pleasures that are good and can honor him. It's the instant gratification. Let's pick on sex. You didn't plan on that today.
Well, that was kind of top of mind. I've always thought that, like, if your whole life is based on based around how much, how often you have sex, like, it's not a gratifying life. And that seems to be what's leading a lot of people.
Let's really
sexual identity, sexual proclivity.
Right. So let's look at it from this standpoint. God made sex between a man and a woman for pleasure and reproduction, right? That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. But then once you start to go more into the realm of, well, no, it's about you just feeling good.
Yeah, it's purely
you can
pleasure.
feel good with whoever you want to feel good with.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're taking something that God has made as good, but you're taking the sex, the pleasure part of it, and you have now turned that into an idol. I can acknowledge that, but I deserve this. And if I don't have this, and if I don't get to do that with whoever I want to, then I don't believe in God. You have an idol. There it is. You've told God what he has to give to you to receive worship. And that's not how that works. Sex is the hot button one because, I mean, between homosexuality, pornography, open relationships, polygamy, polyamorous religion, all these things that are popping up, it was a good thing that God made that we have set. And society has turned that into an idol as well. I mean, when you
Well,
boil
that's
it
what
down,
I think for a lot of people, their how they attain sexual pleasure. So it could be same sex. It could be who they're having sex with. It could be how
right,
often they have sex with, how often
right,
they have sex.
yep.
You see this in, across the spectrum of, heterosexual, homosexual. Some people, their whole life is just, hey, how can I have sex with as many people as possible? And it's
Well,
just
before we go
perversion.
too, I think we need to wind it down before we go too far down the rabbit trail. And I'll end with this visual. I shared this with our church. There was a book written by Neil Gaiman, and it was a TV series. It's called American Gods.
Hmm.
American Gods, and it was about the ancient mythological gods of old, that they were actually real. That mankind kind of manifested them, and they all had their different roles, but they were all real. The Egyptian gods, the Norse gods, the Roman gods, all the different gods, right? But as civilization throughout history crumbled, they all found their way to America because America was a booming, prosperous nation, all this and that. But a lot of them repackaged themselves. And a lot of them found ways to receive worship. And going back to the sex topic, because why not? Let's totally distraught a few listeners. One of the ancient Persian goddess of fertility, for example, was worshipped through hookup culture. That when people were using various one night stand apps, dating apps that would turn to one night stands, she was receiving worship through that. Another god, this was interesting. He was the Roman god of blacksmith, and I can't remember his exact name. But now he's the mayor of a town with firearms machinery, that all these people who were so enthralled and worshipful about having a firearm, and that was their right, and they're entitled to it, and they were passionate and desiring that. He received worship when they cared more about that than they did lives of other people or safety of others, and so forth. There was all these powerful visuals, because when you think about it for a minute, what are we all guilty of? There's something that God has given us that we have a way of corrupting, because it becomes very much who we are. If you say, I'm a blank and a Christian,
Hmm.
you're practicing idolatry. It should always be, I'm a Christian or a disciple of Christ, who, by the way, is also this. Have a guy in my church. I thought this was interesting. He's a veteran. He's a great guy. And he was talking with other veterans, and they were talking about a funeral recently, the whole dog and pony show. And I don't say that lightly. I believe we should honor our veterans, but they wanted the whole Armed Force
Yeah.
Memorial, all this and this. Well, he went to it and he was very upset when it was done. He said, I went to church with that individual for a long time, and at no point in time in the closing of the service did they acknowledge the fact that he was a Christian. Then he was in the armed forces. It was all about the armed forces. And he looked at me. He said, if you do my funeral, Pastor, promise me one thing, that the Christian flag will be draped over my coffin, over the American flag. And I looked at him and I said, are you sure about that? Because that's hot and controversial. He goes, no, because I am a child of God, first and foremost. I'm going home to my creator.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful for my country. I will fight for my country because that's where he placed me, and that's what I fight for. But I also fought for this country so I could worship my Lord. And that hit me between the eyes, because that's the way it should be. That it should always be about honoring God first. And all those things are important, but guess who gave them to us? God. So thank God for the blessings he has given us. Don't thank the blessings for God.
There you go. All right. So That's it.
Speaking of the blessings, my beard smells great because of Bennett's Bodega.
Oh, Lord. So, yeah, check out their link in the description. You can find us at Crushing Canaan on Twitter/X. You can email us at crushingcanaan@gmail.com, or check out BibleContextMatters.com, where you can listen to episodes, find past episodes, leave a note, read some rants, all kinds of good stuff there. BibleContextMatters.com. Check that out. We'll be back next week taking a look at some other commandments in this series as we kind of go through the 10 Commandments here. Thank you guys for listening.
Well, it does tie into Christianese as well, because we throw stuff around that this does address. So
so this is a part of our Christianese series where it's, things you've probably heard about your whole life, but maybe don't understand why or how, or the details of some. So we want to get into some of that. So we'll be back next week talking a little bit more of the 10 Commandments, but thank you for listening. We'll see you next week for another episode of Crushing Canaan.